Thank you for coming to the Startup Investor Accelerator Workshop program. Today, we're going to chat about deal terms for angel investment processes. And we have Tom Horsey from Eoniq Fund here. And I always get the O and the I and the so forth all mixed up, so he'll have to pronounce it for you. So just to set the context, my name is John Seacrest. I run the Seattle Angel Conference. We've been running it for a decade. As a part of that program, we train new angels and we get startups to be more fundable by engaging together in the process of standing and delivering on that process. And we actually have a couple of people here who have been through that process, and so we can, help people learn more about it. We are currently putting together a program for April, which is transatlantic, which is why we have both US and European companies here and why we're in the morning in Seattle. And so we will begin a program on April 21st where we work to go through the program and engage with making an investment together as a learning process. And I will post that into the chat. In addition, in the chat, if you want to be found by other people, you're welcome to put your LinkedIn into the chat, and that's a way that other people can find you and chat with you later if there's something that they say that's interesting. Given that, Tom and I have been having a couple of conversations that I thought were particularly interesting, and he has a perspective on the Spanish ecosystem that was really quite useful. I would like to have a conversation with him today about deal terms and how we're doing that. But let's start with Tom. Who are you, and what is this Eoniq Fund, and what do deal terms matter to you in your context? And if everyone wants to click on the upper right corner and click on speaker view, then you'll see a big Tom instead of the Brady Bunch thing.
That's scary. Okay, so who am I? I'm an entrepreneur at heart, really. Guy from the UK, ended up in sort of moving between southern Spain and for a long time, just southern Spain, and then moving between southern Spain and Malta. I was an entrepreneur, basically focused on sort of technology, internet technology originally back in I started off, I think the first company I set up was 98. And then I reached a point at which I wasn't able to build any more of my own projects. I'd sort of hit the too many things happening at the same time, and I sort of fell by coincidence during that period into business angel investment. And so I started 12 years ago doing business angel investment. 7 years ago, a little bit more now, I went to doing this full time. Done more and less over the years, but currently we've done just over 70 investments. We've got 55 or 57, I think it is, active investments. Wait a second, we should mute.
I'll take care of that.
Yeah, okay. We've got 57 active investments. Got one of them here on the video call. I see Jorge from Euler Tools, very interesting blockchain based project. And Eoniq is really the evolution of that business angel investment. So Eoniq's an angel investment fund, early stage fund, does angel size tickets, so 100K more or less initial tickets, but with the capacity to do follow-on. As investors, as angel investors, we've always been very focused on trying to add value. We've treated the investments in effect in the same way as we would have treated, as I did in the past, treat my own companies. So we've always had this focus on adding value, and we've seen that we can add more value if we have more access to more funds, so that we can assist a company in fundraising. Fundraisings a very much of a time waster for founders, which takes them away from their day-to-day business. And so if we can reduce the time required to raise those funds, well, then we're supporting the startup. And one of the ways of doing that is obviously putting the money in yourself. Another way is putting the money in yourself because it helps to convince other investors to co-invest with you, because it's less of a leap of faith then for them, because you're doing a follow-on investment, so you already know what's going on in the company. And if you're doing more, well, then they can assume, probably quite rightly, that it's a less risky investment compared to perhaps to other investments where that's not happening. So deal terms for us, everything really. Obviously one of the most important aspects of investing is valuation.
Let's set the context a little bit. So you intend to go find startups and to put money into some startups. So there's a whole bunch of work that goes from, I met somebody that said something that was interesting enough to have the second conversation, all the way down to I sorted through and did due diligence on them, and I think that they're a interesting business that can give me a return on my investment. And now we've sort of narrowed down the box to, okay, yes, I want to do something with you. How do I get bound to your company? And that's where we're going to talk about deal terms, right? It's that final step of, I'm already at yes. I already understand softly what we're trying to do in terms of deal terms. And so let's talk about that soft circle. And then let's dive in the second step into the more specific things that we end up negotiating on that take more time than we wish it would, right? So let's do the soft circle first. So in the Seattle Angel Conference and in our Angel Conference model, we start with 50 companies and then we sort down through them till we get to 6 finalists. We do due diligence on them, but when we get to the semifinalists, we ask the fund manager, the person who's organizing, to soft circle the deal to make sure that there's a reasonable deal in there, that we're not two guys in a garage with an idea and a dog and a $20 million valuation. And so we would like to sort of put the soft circle around it. So let's talk about that soft circle first, about what would cause you to stop doing due diligence because they're like so far off the chart for you that you're not going to invest, even if it is a really great business.
Okay, so we actually start looking at valuation at the very beginning. So you say we go from 50 down to 60, we go down from 150 down to 1 on a monthly basis. So you're always looking, in a way, you're always looking for red lines, because it's difficult to filter from 149 projects out of 150.
So in the Angel Conference, we're looking to do a 360-degree review of the company, which is fundamentally different about what you said. And what you just said is very important for most angel investors to understand. The goal is not to get the yes. The goal is to get the no as fast as possible. And so as soon as something pops up that is a no, then you say, thank you very much. And then you go on to the other 149, right? I just
exactly
wanted to highlight that, right? So I want to set the tone a little bit still. I'm still trying to groom the tone a little bit. The stage at which you invest matters. And the earlier you are at, the less likely it is that you actually know your valuation. And so when you say we start with valuation, or it's very early in our process, and the startup is still in the, I'm not really clear what my value is, I have no revenue, so how could I have a valuation kind of thought? How do you get to, I have a valuation box that's acceptable?
Okay, so there really you're looking at opportunity from an investor perspective. You're looking at opportunity cost.
Yep.
So there is no real way of saying how much is a startup worth. So we really look at comparing like with like. So a lot of our initial analysis is trying to find a common denominator between lots of very different projects.
So could you give us sort of like 3 to 5 examples of companies with stages, that sort of are the different kinds of like that you would look at? So when I grab one of the random people out of the room and say, what's the value of your company? Which box are they going to fall into, kind of thing?
Yeah, okay. Not well. Maybe I'm explaining myself so well there. What I mean is, we try to. So if a company has one founder or a company has 3 founders, theoretically, statistically, the 3 founders is better than the 1 founder. But in just looking at that one parameter, a company with 3 founders is more likely to succeed statistically than a company with 1. In our particular instance, as hands-on investors, and particularly now we're talking about being hands-on investors that are doing follow-on investments, we're looking for startups where we can add value. So that makes it more difficult as well to select the startups, because if there's a weakness, and this is something that Jorge from Euler Tools, we're actually in that process of, that we with him, we evaluated a weakness and we evaluated a solution to that weakness. And we said, okay, within the deal terms, and this is where we'll come down to it, he puts his heart on, within the deal terms, we say, okay, but we need you to resolve this weakness. And that, I think, has helped both of us. It's helped him and it's helped us. It does make that does make it more difficult, because then the red lines become a little more blurry, and they're not quite now, they're like chemical weapons lines for in Syria, or was it? No, it wasn't really. You don't know. They become a little bit blurrier. But there are, so in our instance, we're looking for companies we can add value to, that have, that fit the criteria generally we've seen that works with investments that we invest in. And in terms of valuation, which is the sort of trying to find something like with like, you've got sort of different stages, and it really depends on the sector and the type of company and all that. You can't compare a SaaS with a, but what we try and do is look at if they're pre-revenue, if it's a pre-revenue marketplace, so there's not a lot of, it's difficult to build up demand and supply, that equilibrium between the two. It's not very difficult to set up a marketplace. You don't need a lot of, you don't need patents to do this. We'll be looking for a lower valuation than if, for example, it's some kind of hardware-driven company where they've built a prototype, they have 5 patent pendings, etc., etc. Well, that obviously has a different value to the marketplace. But they're both pre-revenue, and maybe they both have 1 founder. But there we're trying to then make that comparison. If they have traction, then you sort of look at what's happening to their curve of growth. How fast are they growing? Is this growth continual? Has it been happening over a period of months or quarters? How likely is it to continue? And how does the valuation compare to, and here we look at the gross margin. We don't look, because obviously a SaaS has a margin of 90% and a marketplace has a margin of 10. So you can't, you can't look at, okay, invoicing or GM. We don't even look at GMV. We look at, what's your gross margin? And then we look at more or less what type of multiple are you looking at on your gross margin. And sometimes, in the last week, I can tell you a startup, both of them growing quite fast, where we've had one that's at 8 times annual gross margin, and another one's at 100 times annual gross margin. And you go, well, there isn't a curve. The curve on both in terms of growth is very similar. So from our perspective, it makes it very difficult to invest in the one that's trying to say, no, I'm worth 100 times ARR.
Right. So there are definitely businesses that their revenue model drives them to a 1x multiple. And there are other businesses, still software and SaaS businesses, that are easy to argue for an 8 to 10 multiple. And very rarely do we see something where a 100x multiple actually ever makes any sense at all, right? So we're trying to dance between those choices. There's a book I just put into the chat by Dave Parker that goes through in some detail around how a revenue model impacts your multiple. And I think that's a worthwhile thing. But I feel like we're sort of diving a little bit into the weeds a little bit, and we haven't defined some basic things. So let's take a half a step back.
Offers made a question. I mean, we can in the chat.
Right. So we may or may not be talking about companies at pre-revenue. And the more that we believe in lean startup and customer discovery precedes product development, the less likely we are really to be investing in pre-revenue companies, because the act of discovering customers should also be driving revenue directly. And yes, Sebastian, we will be doing a recording and posting that onto our YouTube channel, and I'll post that later. But yes, we might choose to invest pre-revenue, and we still will care about the valuation, but we might invest using different mechanisms. And so we should talk a little bit about the mechanisms about what an investment is. In the idealized angel investment mechanism, your best deal structure looks like what? If you could have it your way every time and it was perfect for you, what structure would you use?
Okay, I mean, we've gone through a lot of tests. I think as an angel investor, not with a regulated fund as we have, and there's a big difference because there's a bureaucratic cost for a fund that means that below a certain amount of investment, it just makes no sense, because you've got all the workload and you're not going to get the return even if things go
so
well.
There are economics for funds where you write too small of a check, and the overhead of managing it is way higher than it's economical. And so like raising a fund below 8 million is just nuts for most people, right? Unless you use a rolling fund, and then that's a different structure with that, has its own sharp edges. But you are a fund, you have a check size that's constrained by that, as opposed to angel investors that might be writing $5,000 checks. You're writing $100,000 checks for a reason.
Yeah. So that's when going back to the perfect situation in sort of, I think as an angel investor, one of the things that we've been through, one of the stages that we've been through, and I'm not sure it's the best, but can be in circumstances is milestone investments. So you agree an amount, and you're only gonna make certain payments when certain milestones are hit. And I've used that a number of times in the past. As a fund, we've talked about doing it, and we've decided that it's not worthwhile because of this minimum check size. But as an angel investor, I think it's something, there are certain circumstances, maybe, for example, if it's a company that is pre-revenue, where this would make sense. But going back a sec, because it's very difficult, we were talking about valuation before. Valuation's probably the biggest sticking, in all of the deal terms that we can talk through, probably the biggest sticking point is valuation, because
and so a lot of times when we get to early pre-revenue companies, the company is much more optimistic about their future than we are, and their valuation shows their optimism, and we choose to avoid the question by using a convertible note instead of utilizing a preferred round. So I was suggesting that we would ideally do a priced preferred round every time. Simplifies a whole bunch of things, right? And then we get into situations where the argument about what your valuation is so hard to resolve in a reasonable way that we just put it off the side and use a convertible note. Do you currently use convertible notes?
We do use convertible notes. What I was going to say, I mean, here you've put a series of options. What I was going to say, because you're saying, what would you do in a perfect situation? I was going, okay, because often the obstacle that we hit is the first obstacle that we hit is valuation. I think, and because, as you say, it's the optimism that pulling across a formula in Excel can generate in a startup's financial plan and their belief in their own, you know, their own capabilities. It's so easy to do, right? You go, oh no, look, it doesn't quite look. I'll put 1.4 rather than 1.35. Oh, look how the figures are. So and that it's impossible, right? None of us know what the future is going to hold. So one of the ways that we look at resolving that, one way could be convertible notes, but we're not huge fans, because you end up having a discussion about floors and caps and discounts and times and how long it's going to take and all the rest of it. So it's not a perfect solution. It's a partial solution. One of our preferred ways is to say, okay, look, if you don't hit, we'll invest. You say that you're going to hit this revenue in the next 6 months or next 12 months, fine. And that's what your valuation is based on. If you don't hit these figures in 6-12 months, well, then we retroactively modify the valuation. I'm not, you know, we're not arguing, you're not arguing, and now startups, funnily enough, often don't want to do this.
There's some sharp edges to that conversation that come up that you have to be dangerous. But I have watched people do that and take the tranche and then take the down round because they didn't deliver on what they said they were going to do, right? Yeah.
Well, that's what I do as an entrepreneur. I believe in my own capabilities, and I'm not going to put something that I don't believe in. Obviously, this is more difficult when you're coming first-time founders. They're not really that sure. People that maybe don't know the industry from the inside, they've just seen that there's an opportunity and they're taking it. I mean, these are the kinds of things that you look at, you know, in the whole process of analysis to you know, their traction to date, their milestones hits, all these things you look at to see how much you can believe in what their plans are for the future. Right. But just going back to what you're saying in terms of convertible notes, we do, and it is becoming, I think it's more of a trend I'm seeing in startups use convertible notes. I've seen convertible notes without caps. I don't understand it, honestly. So
let's talk a little bit about, you know, so for a convertible note, there's each category of thing, right? Common stock, preferred stock, safe, convertible note. They each have their own little knobs that you can turn. So a convertible note is basically, I'm going to give you the money. You're going to pretend that it's a loan. You're going to have an interest rate on it. You're going to have a term for the loan. By the time we get to the end of the term, you're supposed to have gotten follow-on money. That follow-on money would set a price, and then we will convert to that price with the discount, right? So those are basically the knobs. If I end up having an overly enthusiastic second funder, then they set the price really, really high. Therefore, the percentage of the company I get goes really, really low. And so my convertible note was essentially a worthless investment. So I'm going to put a cap on it so that when they get overly enthusiastic later, that I protect my percentage of the company at some level. So good angel investors will not use uncapped notes, right? So that sort of sets the frame about all the things we need to know about a convertible note. When we accept one thing, at the end of the term, when you haven't gotten your funding like you said you would, then we have to do something about it. And somewhere in the convertible note is the rules about what will happen when you get to the end. Either you pay us the money back, or you convert us to common stock, or you convert us to preferred stock, something, right? We pick something. And we have to think about that at some level of detail. But do you do a lot of convertible notes?
No.
Why not?
Because there's this problem with relying on somebody else to make a valuation.
Yeah,
you know,
it's really a nasty problem.
It is a nasty problem. It's like, you know, arranged marriages, you know, aren't acceptable in most of the world because you don't want somebody else choosing your wife or your husband, you know. Right. And in a way you're saying, oh no, you know, you're going to be buying this at the price that I set. Well, you know, if that doesn't make sense to me, then
right, absolutely.
I don't want to do it.
Let's, you know, there's all these other, you know, rapidly evolving things, the KISS, the seal, the safe. For the most part, they're not simple and they're messy and they're untried. And so I tend to stay away from them. I'm hearing that you tend to stay away from them. I think it's worthwhile to understand the seal from, I guess they're called Calm Fund now by Tyler Tringas, because it's a revenue redemption model, a revenue-based model instead of an equity-based model. I think there's a lot of startups that really are not Series A fundable. Never will be Series A fundable, but might be angel fundable through a seal. So that's worth entrepreneurs knowing that it exists, and you should go look at that. But for most people that are on the high growth stage, we're planning on the Series A and maybe the Series B. And so we need to be focused on the equity, which typically leads us to a preferred round. So can you talk about a preferred round a little bit?
Yeah, so you know, in terms of, if just going back to the revenue-based financing role, we actually suggest revenue-based financing quite regularly to our startups because it is expensive, as you know, as loans go, but it's more expensive for those that work well because they pay it back faster, and less expensive for those that don't work so well. Sorry, just a sec. I'll come back. But we do suggest it because anything equity is extremely expensive to an entrepreneur.
So to put a number on it, if I'm a successful angel investor in the United States, I'm going to see a portfolio of at least 20 to 40 deals, and out of that portfolio, I'm going to see a 3x return or so, and that 3x return, if I'm doing a good job, is 25 to 30% IRR. So would you go and fund your startup on credit cards at 30% IRR, right? That's essentially what you're doing when you do angel investing, is you're getting a 30% loan. The nice thing about it is that you have no payments until the end. The not nice thing about it is that 30% compounded over 10 years is a lot of money.
Although decent angel investors will be adding a lot more value than just the money. So it's not just the credit card, you're being given cash back on a monthly basis.
Angel investing really is best when the angel investors are creating value for the company, and as a result, they get amplification. And if you are an entrepreneur just looking for money, you are missing the most important part of angel investing.
And if you're an angel investor that's just putting in money, I think you're missing the most interesting thing about the angel investing too. But in any case, just going, so we'll go back to your saying your soft circle and your deal terms and all the rest of it. So as a general rule, we will invest directly in equity, as you say. In Spain, you don't tend to have different classes, at least in an early stage. You don't tend to have different classes of shares. It is something that it's more American, I think, in that respect, or more, it's more that side of the Atlantic. Here it's not so common. You sometimes see it. I think out of our 55, 57 odd investments right now, we see it on, I think there's 3 that have different classes of shares. So it's really not a common thing, and they've had it imposed on them by bigger funds at later stages. So as angel investors, we tend to come in same class as everyone else, and then the over and above valuation, there are sometimes specific terms that we have to agree, specific, should we say, milestones, a bit like the example I was saying with Euler Tools, that we agree in advance, because without those, the investment seems to be higher risk. So to give some examples in that instance, there's one company where, for example, we've insisted that they spend a minimum amount on direct-to-consumer marketing, and that they contract a marketing agency that we approve of with them. We know about marketing as entrepreneurs, so it's not just because we're trying to stick our foot in, it's because we can actually help them in an intelligent way in this respect.
So you as a company are much more aggressive about your tuning the wobbly startup than the average angel investor. Would you say that's true?
I wouldn't say aggressive. I would say that sometimes where we see weaknesses in a startup, we see them as opportunities to add more value to the startup. So that was where I say the red lines become more blurry.
And a lot of investors are not paying enough attention to that value creation, and they take simple, straight agreements that are narrow, that don't have any of these things that you're talking about on it, right? It's just a straight, simple agreement. No, and we don't have to worry about that. So one of the things that, basically, I put money into the company. I want not to be messed up by the other investors as they come in. So I have a most favored nations clause. I want to get information rights so that I know what's happening to the company. And I may or may not want voting rights on the board, right? And the earlier you are, the less you have voting rights. Do you ask for any of those?
Okay, so information, we do ask that people provide at least quarterly reporting, and this is required, I think, for multiple reasons. One is we have a fiduciary duty to our investors to be on top of where we're investing. Mm-hmm. And secondly, if we don't have information about a startup, how can we possibly help them? If we don't know what's happening, there's no way we can help them connect dots, connect them with people, help them with family. I mean, there's nothing. We're just blind.
So one of the problems with startups is that they fail to communicate early and often enough so that when they get on the slippery slope to trouble, that they don't give us the chance as investors to be helpful. And they're so far over the cliff that they're going to kill the company. And there's nothing we can do because we didn't know soon enough. And so you're trying to prevent that by having information rights early. And you'd really rather have them send you notes every day about what they're having trouble with, and to have them send a quarterly report after they're 3 months over the waterfall and in trouble. That's a crisis, right?
Well, that's why we try to keep in touch with them on WhatsApp. So Jorge, I don't know, I don't think I sent him anything today, but I certainly did yesterday. And if you think that there's 57 of them, there's a lot of communication that goes on. I think you can't, with people that can add value, to stakeholders that can add value, whether those are employees, they're investors, providers, partners, I don't think you can have too much communication. You can have unproductive communication, but if the communication is productive and you're not telling them useless stuff, I don't think you can have too much of it. So somewhere they're gonna find value in this information that works to your favor. So information rights is a definite. That's very important to us. It's also very important, particularly now as a fund with follow-on. If we don't know what's going on, we haven't seen how they've developed and how they've evolved, how are we going to take a proper decision about follow-on? So they're not going to get the follow-on. So it's in, just for that one very reason, it's probably not in their, it's probably in their interest to do it. In terms of voting rights, as at an early stage, dilution per round, maximum is going to be 30, probably the minimum is going to be 10, so that the average per round is probably around about 20. So in your first round, and we tend to get involved at the first round, or the first professional round, you know, you're going to find that the founders have probably got 80% and everybody else has got 20%. So you know, what's important there is, and I don't know how you say it in reinforced majorities is how you say it in English. Yeah.
Yes.
So what's important there is there are certain decisions that are you know, vital or really can affect a company, such as I don't know, the rounds, capital raises, maybe complete changes, pivots of strategy. I don't know. There are certain things that are mega important. Change in the administrator, in the directors, the board of directors, this kind of thing, that are really important. And so what we try to achieve is that it needs the founders plus one. So you know, whatever, if it's just us doing the round, well, it would be the founders plus us. If there's three of us involved, it would be the founders plus one of those three. But somebody that's impartial and that in theory is going to look at the higher that level is, the better perhaps for the investor, but obviously it makes it less agile, and at no point in time do we want to take away agility from companies that need to be agile to survive, right, in stormy waters.
Absolutely.
And then in terms of board seats, you know, normally at an early stage there isn't a board, but even if there were, we tend to prefer at an early stage not to be on a board. And the reason for this is that we have a lot of startups in portfolio, and the communication that happens in a board meeting is very much tends to be sort of one-way reporting. And so it's not very effective communication for hands-on investors as ourselves. So I find it much better that Jorge at 7 o'clock in the morning, like I think yesterday's, you know, I send him a WhatsApp or he asks me a question and I respond when I can, than to find that we're sitting in a board meeting together and he's giving us information. And
there are lots of consequences for being on a board that make it a complex thing. And early on, it's probably not in anybody's interest for that to be a complex process. So exactly. There is a point maybe at the Series A that starts making sense. But at the Series A, we have a whole bunch of uncertainty removed from the system. And so it's a different business. So exactly. Investing at pre-seed, investing at seed, investing at Series A, they're fundamentally different asset classes in a sense. And they have very fundamentally different issues. I want to make sure that we have some time for Q&A. Are there specific things that you want to talk about? Because we have about 10 minutes left.
No, I mean, just in terms of the board, I was just going to say, so we try to add in the deal terms, the right to have an observer on the board.
Right.
Because of fiduciary rights, as you say, at a later stage, it becomes a larger proportion of our overall investment. And at that stage, you have to do it to know what's going on. You have to be more involved.
So the observer rights are important for the investors so that they can manage the consequences of the behaviors of the other investors later on. And that I agree is important. And the follow-on rounds often use whatever the deal terms that you create now as the basis of their deal terms. And so putting good foundations in now makes for simpler conversations later.
Certainly, because then there's no, you know, if there's a conflict, it's the future investor that has to create the conflict, not yourself to ask them for something that if you'd asked at the beginning wouldn't have, right, would just be in there already. But
we both agree that simple terms matter.
Yeah.
And so being as simple as possible. So I want to open this up to questions for people. So I see here, Ashley, as for the startups, what to negotiate for in the deal terms? Well, the knobs on the deal terms are pretty narrow in some sense, right? You have to decide what your mechanism is, and then the mechanism decides the knobs. You want to talk about that a little bit?
I mean, I think for the startup, the probably the most important factors are the reinforced majority. So how much control do they have over these important decisions that this company is going to make? You know, is it founders plus one, or is it founders plus a majority of investors? That tends to be a common, not maybe at the earlier stage, but a later stage tends to be a common one. And I think there you're perhaps creating yourself a problem. Valuation, obviously. And I think also salaries, because there's...
So we want the founders, we being me, want the founders to take their salary out of revenue, not out of capital. And that aligns our incentives. How does that fit for you?
It's similar. I have a very sort of, my philosophy on entrepreneurs, because it's what I've done myself, is I've never earned a salary as an entrepreneur. I've earned from dividends. Now, I understand that a startup isn't built to distribute dividends, for starters. So that's a more, you know, there's slightly more complexity perhaps there. But I do believe that there's a balance between investors and founders, where the founder works loads of hours for a below market salary, and the investor puts in money and puts in support and doesn't earn a salary for the support that they're putting in. But so one's putting in more time, less money, one's putting in more money, less time. And you know, if you find that the startup founders are earning a market salary, then that balance just doesn't, you know, it's not there. Then
why that we're trying to fight is this creation of zombie companies that are alive but never will exit. And so if you're comfortable as a founder with your salary and you're getting market rate and you have all the control of your company and you never exit, then the investment was not an investment, it was a donation. And that's not good for us at all. So we would like for it to not happen. We would like to remove the 7% of companies that turn into zombies by giving some mechanism by which we put pressure on people being comfortable in doing just enough and not growing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right. So I see, how do you put a value on pending patents, utility models, letter of interest, potential contracts, etc.? And just to put my 2 cents in, I'm much less interested in seeing potential or a hand wavy this or a list of possible people than I am to see a list of people that paid you for something, right? I would like a commitment from the folks. And so I discount letters of intent where other people see them as being more valuable. What would you do around all of those squishy things that are not revenue?
I think that it's information that supports a financial forecast, but it doesn't do more than support a financial forecast. So it might help us. Huh?
It doesn't change the valuation.
It doesn't. Well, it doesn't. No, it doesn't really change the valuation. Maybe it helps us believe a little bit more in the forecasts that there are. So maybe we go in at a little bit of a higher valuation than we would have.
It's more like they're mandatory things that if you have them, now you are getting to being successful. And if you don't have them, you're still in the dream stage, right? Yeah. All right. So what does it mean that founders don't get paid until the company is generating revenue? So
no, I don't believe it does. I believe what you're saying, and it comes out of revenue, is that if I'm a founder and I'm paying myself a minimum salary, nobody wants somebody to be begging in the streets, right? We want people to be able to live, just not super comfortably, without making the effort that means that as an investor it makes sense for you to do this investment in the first place. So but that doesn't mean that they can't earn a commission. You know, I think one of my best startups was 2 guys that had no salary, but they were paying themselves 20% commission on gross margin. I go, okay, that's fine. That's a standard sort of commission for a sales, but you know, between 20 and 30% is sort of standard. Pay yourself as much as you like actually in commission. don't put any cap on it, because 80% of that margin is staying in the company. And
But I think Alex is saying, what if I don't have revenue? And what I'm saying is, I would like you to focus on revenue really hard so that you get a functional business at the core, so that you can then grow that revenue, rather than, oh, I have this dream. It's going to take me 2.5 years to build the perfect product. So pay me a salary to work in my garage to work on the perfect product before I get any sales whatsoever. That's really an uncomfortable option for me. What about you?
yeah, no, I agree. You should be receiving a below market salary.
So I come in, I have a really great technology. It's really nice. It's going to take me 2 years until I get my first sale, because I have a lot of dinking to do on my product. I have a prototype that is scientific prototype. I don't have a production prototype. Now I need to get salary for me and my 3 friends so that we can do the production prototype. Is that a business you would invest in? It's really a great business. Hundreds of millions of dollars of sales just backed up waiting for us to produce the first version of this.
I'd have to look at the details.
You don't trust what I'm saying, because all of that is hand waving and there's no commitments along that path, and you want to see the money.
Yeah, it would be
that's the feeling that the investors are generally having when people tell us that they want a salary for long periods of time, right? So my argument is, startups need to focus really hard initially on getting cash flow positive as fast as possible, so that they're sustainable and have resilience in some way. And if that's not part of their financial model, we need to help them get to that financial model.
Yeah.
Any more questions that people want to
There is
ask?
one said, what's the hardest and most important lesson you've learned as an investor? Probably to not get too excited with a startup. It's, but most of us that are angel investors tend to be entrepreneurs. So we often see things as entrepreneurs. We get excited by entrepreneurs. We want to support entrepreneurs because it goes with our way of living life. It's the meaning of it all, right? And I have made mistakes where I've identified a future which I then realized is completely different to the future that the founders had in mind. Right. And I think that's because I've got too excited with the project and I've gone, wow, okay, we can do this. And then I've seen that we're going there, and the founders are thinking, no, we're going over here. And just getting too excited is something.
Right. We have to learn to not be the drivers of the entrepreneur, and we can see the vision of where you could take it. Now, if I were running the company, it would go like this. And then we invest in that, not invest in what the founder is doing.
Exactly.
And that difference can kill companies. So we have to be very careful about that. Any other questions from the audience that we want to address? So Ashtik, you want to come on and tell us about what you're doing with the Startup Investor Accelerator?
Thanks a lot, John, for passing me the ball. Thank you so much, Tom. It was so nice to learn from you, and so much experience that you have accumulated over the years, both as an entrepreneur and as an investor. So thank you so much for your time, which I know you don't have that much of. And thanks, John, for moderating. Hi, everyone. As most of you probably know me, I'm Astrid, based here in Barcelona, and I'm partnered with John, where we are running Startup Investor Accelerator. So what we essentially do is help people become angel investors and start by a process of learning by doing. It's a practical way to get started. We are starting a process that, as John mentioned, is starting on April 21st. This is the first time that this program is allowing non-American, American and Canadian based investors also to join. So we are looking forward to quite some of you that are already in the process of starting the program. And also for startups that are looking for investment, there'll be competition going it's on one side we are training angel investors, on the other side the same investors are learning how to evaluate and work with startups. So any startups that are ready for investment or are early stage, pre or post revenue stage, that are ready to deal with investors, please reach out to me or to John, and then you can join the competition process. John, does this give enough introduction?
Cool, thank you. So we have tomorrow a workshop with Javier Soto. Javier Soto is one of our success stories at the Seattle Angel Conference. Started angel investing with Seattle Angel Conference, liked it enough that he created an angel group called Grub Stakes. He's originally from Spain, and he'll be giving a conversation tomorrow. I put the link into the chat. Again, if you want to be found, please put your link into the chat. I will stick around for a few more minutes for people that want to ask questions. Otherwise, thank you so very much for coming. And we will keep doing these things over the next several months as we try to get the word out about how people can be effective at growing their startup and funding startups. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Guys. See ya.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Tom.
Bye-bye, Tom.
Goodbye.
Bye. Welcome. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, John, when I joined the breakout room, I also promised that I would stay, and we can stay maybe 15, 20 minutes to do some networking and answer more questions in case anyone wants to stay.
Anybody have any questions or thoughts? Hi, Abril. Nice to see you.
Hello, how are you? Nice
I'm
meeting
doing
you
great.
too.
Thank you. Nice to have you here. So Ophir is our SPV organizer. He's the one that's going to coordinate all of the angels and
Hello. Hi, April.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi,
And
Jorge.
we have, so many of you don't know Hovhannes. Hovhannes is based in Vilnius, and he's Armenian guy and also potentially joining the program. So thanks a lot for joining Hovhannes today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. It was a true pleasure.
Cool. I would
Thank
love
you.
to learn more about Vilnius and their angel environment. I don't know much about them. I know more about Riga and Tallinn, but not enough about Vilnius. Any other thoughts that people have? Hi, Ali.
Hi, John. Long time no see.
Yeah, I'll
I'm
joke
happy
with
to
Jen.
see you again.
Yep. Look at that. We have 2 asterisks.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
also looking at
That
that.
was my
That's nice.
This is an
Very unique,
unbelievable
yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
Generally,
never-
one
never
asterisk is
happened.
too difficult to pronounce.
So, Jorge, any questions?
No, not so far. Thanks
No?
for.
All right. So I put into the chat a book called Angel Investing by David Rose. It aligns very well with what we've been doing. It talks about the details pretty well. And Appendix D, I think it is, has a revenue agreement in it as an example, which is something that entrepreneurs really should understand, the difference between an equity agreement and a revenue agreement. So that's a deal term that I think is worthwhile to pay attention to. There's another book by Looney Libs called Revenue-Based Financing, which we have done some workshops around as well, which I think is also useful for entrepreneurs to read and pay attention to. If you think about companies, there are companies, the 0.01% of companies that go up like crazy. And those are the ones that are the unicorns that people are chasing. But there's another group that's still exponential, but just not quite that exponential. And after getting a seed round, 60% of the companies do not get their Series A round. So if you think I'm an angel, I write my seed check, then on average, less than half of them are going to get to the next stage. So what do I do as an angel so that when my company does not get that Series A funding, how do I get them to a success story that gets my money back? Well, one of the answers is a revenue redemption model that will take care of that. And so there is this great big event or opportunity, I guess, for angel investors to invest in companies that venture capitalists never invest in, right? And so there's like 40% of startups that angels can invest in and can help get to an exit without ever getting the venture capital, which gives a much broader playing field for angels than is available for venture capital. And so as angel investors, we should try to make sure we understand where the founder is trying to take their company. Any other thoughts or questions? Hi, Alex.
Alex is
No.
right on time.
Yeah, we're right at the end of the previous workshop.
Did you have a question, Ophir? No, okay, no, okay.
All right.
Well, I guess that's where we live today. So I'll stay in the chat with John, and Abdul, if you want to stay, and Hovannes, since you are almost in the process. So let's stay in chat. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining. You know, feel free to reach out to me or John for any questions you have regarding the program for investors or the program for startups. See you in the next
Thank you.
workshop
Thank you
that
very
is
much.
tomorrow.